"I can't give you children," she said, but the giant Apache lifted the cloth and married her anyway. The dusty street went silent. A school bell clanged. A woman stood trembling, her secret shame ripped open before the whole town. And then an Apache warrior, tall as the church doors, wrapped his blanket around her shoulders. It wasn't just protection. It was marriage, by a vow older than the railroad, older than the town itself. But this marriage wasn't the end of her troubles, it was the beginning. Because a greedy company has come for the town's only water. And the only way to stop them is if a barren schoolmarm and a widowed warrior fight side by side. Yet, the deputy's chains are waiting, a false charge, a stolen deed. And whispers in the saloon say the law itself will be bought before sundown. What happens when love born from shame must stand against a railroad's greed? And can a woman who can't give children discover a family larger than blood? Every story begins with a heartbeat. Tell me, where are you in the world today? And how are you really doing? Your words make this space feel more human. The autumn wind whipped down Main Street, stirring dust devils between the weathered storefronts of the small Colorado town. Lily Whitfield stood on the wooden steps of her schoolhouse, watching her students scatter like quail toward waiting parents. Their footsteps thundered across the porch as they called out goodbyes. "Good evening, Miss Whitfield." Little Sarah Jenkins waved, her braids bouncing as she skipped down the steps. "Good evening, Sarah. Mind those mud puddles now." Lily smiled, though the expression didn't quite reach her eyes. The setting sun painted long shadows across the street as she gathered her shawl closer. The brass key turned heavily in the lock. Another day done. Her stomach growled, reminding her of the empty flour bin at home. With measured steps she made her way toward Miller's Mercantile, nodding politely to townspeople as she passed. The street was unusually busy for a weekday evening. A cattle drive had just passed through, leaving behind trail-weary cowboys with coins burning holes in their pockets. Their boisterous laughter spilled from the saloon, making Lily walk a bit faster. The bell above Miller's door chimed as she stepped inside. "Evening, Mrs. Miller. I need 5 pounds of flour, please." Before Mrs. Miller could respond, a loud voice boomed from the doorway. "Well, if it ain't the prettiest schoolmarm this side of the Mississippi." Lily's shoulders tensed. She recognized that voice, Hank Dawson, one of the local ranchers. The sharp smell of whiskey preceded him as he swaggered into the store. "Good evening, Mr. Dawson," she said stiffly, turning back to the counter. "Now don't be so formal, darlin'." He stepped closer, swaying slightly. "Been thinking on this a spell. A fine woman like you needs a man to look after her." He'd crept up Lily's neck as other customers stopped to watch. "I manage quite well on my own, thank you. Ain't proper, a woman your age living alone." He thrust out his hand, displaying a small brass ring. "I'm offering to make an honest woman of you." Lily's heart hammered against her ribs. "Mr. Dawson, please." "I must decline." "Decline?" He barked out a laugh. "Ain't getting any younger, Miss Whitfield. 35's mighty late to be picky." His voice grew louder, drawing more onlookers. "Unless there's something wrong with you? That why you're first. Husband never got you in the family way?" The words struck like physical blows. Lily's vision blurred as curious faces pressed closer, eager for gossip. The truth she'd guarded so carefully spilled out before she could stop it. "I can't give a man children." Laughter rippled through the growing crowd. Someone whispered, "Barren as winter wheat." Shame burned hot in her chest. Lily clutched her shawl and tried to push past Dawson toward the door, but his hand shot out, gripping her arm. "Let go of me." Her voice shook. "Now don't be like that." Dawson's words cut off abruptly as a shadow fell across them both. A tall figure stepped between them, and suddenly Lily felt thick, warm wool settling across her shoulders. The weave was intricate, geometric patterns, in earth tones that spoke of distant mountains and desert skies. A profound silence fell over the crowd. Lily looked up into the face of the man who'd intervened. His features were hewn from bronze, weathered by sun and wind, with eyes dark and steady as mountain pools. She recognized him as Nanton, the Apache scout who sometimes passed through town on army business. Reverend Matthew's voice cut through the silence. "Good Lord above." The preacher stepped forward, his expression grave. "Do you know what you've done, sir?" In Apache tradition, Wrapping a woman in your blanket is a declaration of marriage." Nanton's voice was deep and clear, touched with the barest hint of accent. "I know our ways. She is my wife." The crowd erupted in gasps and mutters. Lily stood frozen, the warm weight of the blanket pressing on her shoulders like destiny itself. Lanterns flickered to life along the street as evening deepened, their glow catching the silver at Nanton's temples and the quiet determination in his stance. Hank Dawson had stumbled back, his face mottled red. "Now see here. The lady has made her choice." Nanton's words were soft but carried the weight of stone. Mrs. Miller cleared her throat. "Well, I suppose congratulations are in order?" The question in her voice echoed the disbelief rippling through the gathering. Lily's mind whirled like autumn leaves in a storm. The man beside her was practically a stranger, yet he'd stepped forward to defend her honor when no one else would. The blanket around her shoulders felt like protection, like dignity restored. She lifted her chin, meeting the shocked stares of her neighbors. "Thank you," she managed to whisper, though whether to Nanton or Mrs. Miller, she wasn't quite sure. Nanton's hand settled lightly at her elbow, steady and warm. "Come, the hour grows late." As he guided her toward the door, the crowd parted like water around a stone. Lily heard whispers following them into the gathering dusk, but they seemed distant now, muffled by the soft wool wrapped around her, and the sure presence at her side. The last rays of sunlight caught the dust motes dancing in the air, turning them to gold. Lily walked beside her unexpected husband, her heart thundering with questions she couldn't voice. Yet something in his measured stride and the gentle way he defended her made her wonder if, perhaps this strange twist of fate wasn't entirely random after all. The crowd's reaction rippled outward from Miller's mercantile like waves in a pond. Some folks snickered behind raised hands, while others shifted uneasily, their boots scuffing the wooden sidewalk. Mrs. Peterson, the banker's wife, pressed her handkerchief to her mouth in shock. "This can't be," Lily whispered, her fingers clutching the edges of the blanket. "There's been a mistake." She tried to shrug off the warm wool, but Nanton's steady presence beside her made her movements hesitant. The preacher stepped forward, his usual commanding voice gentle but firm. "Miss Whitfield," Reverend Matthews said, "custom must be respected. The Army has long honored Apache traditions in these territories to keep peace. This," he gestured at the blanket, "this is as binding as any ceremony I could perform." "But I didn't agree to—" Lily's protest died in her throat as more townspeople gathered, their faces a blur of judgment and curiosity. The weight of their stares pressed against her like a physical thing. Nanton's hand returned to her elbow, somehow both gentle and immovable. "Come," he said simply, turning her away from the growing crowd. They walked in silence past the general store, the barber shop, the telegraph office. Lily's feet moved of their own accord, carrying her toward the familiar shape of her schoolhouse. The building stood dark against the purple evening sky, its windows reflecting the last gleam of sunset. At the bottom of the schoolhouse steps, Lily found her voice. "We need to talk." She fumbled with her key, hands shaking slightly as she unlocked the door. "Please, come inside." The lamp sputtered to life, casting warm light across the neat rows of desks. Lily set it on her teaching table and turned to face Nanton. He stood just inside the doorway, his presence filling the small room without moving. The blankets slipped from her shoulders as she squared them. "Why did you do this?" The words came out sharper than she intended. Nanton's dark eyes met hers steadily. "You were shamed. I gave you honor." Such simple words for such a complex situation. Lily opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. The memory of Hank Dawson's cruel words rose up, along with the sting of public humiliation. She wrapped her arms around herself, surprised to find she missed the warmth of the blanket. "But marriage?" Her voice cracked slightly. "To a stranger?" "Not stranger," he corrected quietly. "I have watched you teach the children, all children, even those others turn away." Lily remembered the two Apache children who sometimes sat at the back of her classroom, how their eyes had lit up when she smiled at them. She hadn't known Nanton had noticed. Still, she protested, but with less conviction. Something else was creeping in, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. Safety, protection, the simple knowledge that someone had stood up for her when she needed it most. Nanton picked up the blanket from where it had fallen and held it. out to her, not placing it on her shoulders this time, but offering a choice. "Night comes," he said. "You should rest. We will speak more in the morning light." Lily took the blanket, its wool rough against her fingers. "You can't possibly mean to stay." "I will sleep on the porch bench." His tone brooked no argument. "It is proper." Proper. The word almost made her laugh. Nothing about this situation was proper, and yet she thought of going home to her empty house, facing the whispers and stares alone tomorrow. "Very well," she said finally, "but just for tonight. We'll sort this out in the morning." Nanton nodded once and stepped outside. Through the window, she watched him settle onto the bench, his back straight as a cavalry soldier's dot in her small house behind the schoolhouse. Lily changed for bed with mechanical movements. The narrow bed that had seemed cozy now felt like a prison of thoughts. She knelt beside it, clasping her hands as she had every night since childhood. "Dear Lord," she whispered, "I don't understand your plan here. Is this some sort of divine accident, or—" She paused, remembering the quiet strength in Nanton's voice when he'd faced down the crowd. "Or is it Providence?" Across the street, the saloon buzzed with excitement over the evening's events. Men crowded around tables, retelling the scene with embellishments growing wilder with each round of drinks. In a dark corner, the railroad agent, Thomas Burke, nursed his whiskey and listened. His eyes narrowed as he calculated angles and opportunities. "Imagine that," he murmured to no one in particular, "an Apache claiming one of our women right in broad daylight." He watched the angry murmurs spread among the cowboys at the bar. "Ain't natural." The word natural dripped with suggestion, and several men nodded in agreement. Burke smiled into his glass, already seeing ways to turn this unexpected development to his advantage. The railroad needed that land near the Apache territory, and nothing helped negotiations quite like a town united against a common concern. Back in her bed, Lily pulled the quilts up to her chin. The blanket Nanton had given her lay folded at the foot of her bed, its geometric patterns barely visible in the moonlight. She reached out and touched it, remembering how it had felt when he first placed it around her shoulders, like armor against the world's cruelty. "Watch over us all," she finished her prayer softly, and tried not to think too hard about who exactly she meant by us. Morning light streamed through the schoolhouse windows, painting golden rectangles across the wooden floor. Lily stirred. A pot of porridge hanging over the small stove, the familiar motions doing little to calm her racing thoughts. Through the window, she could see Nanton sitting on the steps, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the dawn sky. The steady scraping sound of stone against metal drifted in. He was sharpening a knife as casually as if he belonged there. Porridge bubbled, and Lily removed it from the heat with more force than necessary. She squared her shoulders, smoothed her apron, and stepped outside. "You cannot stay here permanently," she said, her voice firm despite the slight tremor in her hands. "The blanket ceremony, it was a misunderstanding. Surely you see that." Nanton tested the knife's edge with his thumb, his movements unhurried. "To leave now would dishonor you," he said simply. "The town has seen. Words have been spoken. But I never agreed to." Lily's protest was cut short by the sound of approaching footsteps and childish laughter. Tommy Jenkins rounded the corner first, then stopped so abruptly that his little sister Sarah bumped into him. Both children stared, wide-eyed at Nanton, who continued his work as if nothing was amiss. More students appeared, clustering at the bottom of the steps, their usual morning chatter replaced by whispers and pointed fingers. Heat crept up Lily's neck and into her cheeks. "Children, come inside now," she called, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's time for lessons to begin." The children filed past Nanton, some pressing close to the opposite railing to avoid him, others craning their necks for a better look at the impressive figure on their schoolhouse steps. Lily herded them inside, painfully aware of their curiosity. The morning passed in a blur of arithmetic and reading lessons, though Lily noticed more than a few students gazing out the windows, where Nanton remained, a silent sentinel. When recess time came, she rang the bell with some trepidation. The children spilled out into the yard, their initial wariness of Nanton giving way to the irresistible pull of play. Young Bobby Miller's hoop toy had broken, and he sat dejectedly. On the steps, trying to mend the split wood dot to Lily's surprise, Nanton set aside his knife and reached for the toy. Bobby hesitated only a moment before handing it over. With skilled hands, Nanton examined the break, then pulled a length of sinew from his pocket. His fingers moved surely, binding the wood together with neat, strong knots. Other children drifted closer, watching. When Nanton returned the repaired hoop to Bobby, the boy's face lit up with joy. He gave it an experimental roll, and the hoop spun true across the yard. "Thank you, sir," Bobby called over his shoulder as he chased after it. By the time the school day ended, Lily noticed a marked change in the children's behavior. They no longer skirted widely around Nanton when passing him. Little Sarah Jenkins even waved goodbye as she left. The sun was setting when the first townspeople began to gather across the street. Lily saw Mrs. Peterson and the banker's wife with their heads together, shooting concerned glances toward the schoolhouse. Reverend Matthews approached her as she swept the steps. "Miss Whitfield," he said quietly, "people are talking. Your reputation is already in tatters, I suppose." Lily finished for him, gripping the broom handle tightly. "There's still time to undo this situation," Mrs. Peterson added, her voice carrying clearly across the street, "before it becomes completely unsalvageable." Lily's throat tightened. She glanced through the schoolhouse door, where Nanton was carefully tending the stove fire. His movements were precise, respectful, not those of a man seeking to possess or control, but rather to guard and protect. The realization settled over her like a warm shawl. "Thank you for your concern," she said, turning back to the gathered townspeople, "but I believe I can manage my own affairs." Inside, the stove's warmth had taken the evening chill from the air. Nanton stood and gestured to the table where he had laid out a simple supper of beans, cornbread, and dried meat. Lily hesitated only a moment before sitting down. They ate in silence, the air between them still thick with unspoken words and uncertainty. Through the window, Lily could see men from the railroad survey crew driving stakes along the creek bed, their distant figures black against the sunset sky. The metallic clink of their tools carried faintly on the evening breeze. Looking at Nanton across the table, Lily remembered how the children had gathered around him that afternoon, their natural fear melting away in the face of his quiet kindness. Perhaps, she thought, there was something to learn from this simple acceptance. "You may stay," she said at last, her voice soft but clear. "For now." Nanton nodded once and returned to his meal. No triumph showed in his face, no satisfaction, only the same steady presence he had maintained since placing his blanket around her shoulders the day before. Outside, the survey crew's stakes cast long shadows across the creek bed, like stitches in the fabric of the land. But inside the schoolhouse in the growing darkness, Lily found herself settling into an unexpected peace, born not of certainty but of trust in the strange path that lay before her. The morning sun painted the schoolyard in dappled shadows as Lily gathered her students for their nature lesson. She carried a woven basket for collecting specimens, while 23 eager children followed behind her like ducklings, their own small baskets swinging from their arms. "Remember to stay together," she called over her shoulder as they made their way down the well-worn path to the creek. "We're looking for examples of how nature provides for all God's creatures." From the corner of her eye, she noticed Nanton following at a distance, silent as always but watchful. Since yesterday, his presence had become less startling, though. No less remarkable. The children's excited chatter died suddenly as they rounded the bend, where the creek curved gracefully through town. A group of men in dusty work clothes were hammering wooden stakes into the ground. Large signs hung between the posts, their fresh paint stark against the landscape. "Property of Western and Pacific Railroad Company. Nitrogen monoxide trespassing. Miss Whitfield?" Sarah Jenkins tugged at Lily's skirt, her small face pinched with worry. "Where will we get water for our garden?" Before Lily could answer, angry voices carried across the morning air. Farmers from the nearby homesteads were gathering, along with several mothers who had followed their children. Martha Wilson clutched her apron, pointing at the signs with trembling fingers. "That creek waters half the cattle in the county," Tom Peterson shouted, his face red beneath his weathered hat. Lily stepped forward, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "Excuse me, sir," she addressed the foreman, a barrel-chested man with a thick mustache. "This creek is vital to our community. The school garden feeds many families through winter." The foreman turned, looking down at her with undisguised contempt. "This ain't your concern, ma'am." He pulled a sheaf of papers from his vest pocket, waving them like a flag. "These here documents give the railroad full rights to this waterway. The water belongs to no one man," Nanton's deep voice carried across the crowd. He moved forward, his presence commanding attention. "It has sustained Apache families since before your papers existed." The foreman's hand twitched toward his gun. "Belt, your kind don't have any say in this matter." Several railroad workers stepped closer, hands resting on their tools in a way that spoke more of weapons than work. The tension crackled like lightning before a storm. Lily moved between them, her teacher's instincts taking over. "There are children present," she said firmly, loud enough for all to hear. "Whatever disagreements we have, this is not the way to resolve them." The crowd shifted, parents drawing their children close. The railroad men's stance remained hostile, but they kept their distance. "The law's the law," the foreman spat, but he stepped back. "Clear out now, all of you. This is railroad property." One by one, the townsfolk dispersed, their angry mutters carrying on the morning breeze. "It ain't right," Tom Peterson growled as he turned away. "Ain't right at all." Lily gathered her students, their nature lesson forgotten. "But back to the schoolhouse," she said gently, noting their worried faces. "We'll study from our readers today." The day passed slowly, the children distracted by the morning's events. When the last student had gone home, Lily sank into her chair, the weight of worry settling heavy on her shoulders. Nanton brought her a cup of water, creek water. She realized with a bitter smile. "I fear for what this means," she admitted, looking up at him. "Without the creek, both townsfolk and Apache families will suffer. The railroad's greed will destroy us all." Nanton sat across from her, his dark eyes serious. "The creek was promised to my people," he said quietly, "in the Treaty of 1868. The paper chief spoke of sharing water, of respect between peoples." Lily studied him in the fading light, really seeing him perhaps for the first time. The proud set of his shoulders carried more than physical strength. It bore the weight of his people's future, their rights, their very survival. This was not just her protector who had saved her from humiliation. This was a man fighting for justice in a world that seemed determined to deny it. Their eyes met across the table, and understanding passed between them like a current. Whatever their differences, whatever had brought them to the strange arrangement, they now faced a common enemy. Outside the schoolhouse, unknown to them, the railroad foreman hurried through the deepening dusk toward the agent's office. Inside, Roland Mackenzie sat at his desk, his shrewd eyes glinting in the lamplight. "Well?" the agent demanded. "Just like you said," the foreman reported. "The Apache scout stood with the schoolmarm, got the whole town riled up about the creek." Mackenzie's fingers drummed against his desk. This could be troublesome, he mused. A unified front between settlers and Apaches would be inconvenient for our plans. His thin lips curved into a calculating smile. "We'll have to do something about that." The lamp cast long shadows across his desk, where maps of the territory lay spread like a spider's web, each line and mark representing another piece of land to be claimed, another resource to be taken, another community to be divided and conquered. Days flowed like the contested creek waters, each one bringing small changes to the rhythm of life at the schoolhouse. Morning light would find Lily at her desk, preparing lessons while Nanton worked quietly outside, his presence both strange and oddly comforting. Children's voices filled the air with arithmetic and reading, while through the window, Lily could see Nanton mending the broken fence that had bothered her for months. His large hands moved with surprising gentleness over the splintered wood. By noon, the fence stood straight and true, like everything else he touched out when the water barrel ran low. Nanton appeared with fresh buckets from the creek, setting them down without ceremony. Lily noticed how he timed these tasks to avoid disturbing her lessons, his consideration speaking louder than words. One afternoon, she found a small bundle of dried herbs on her desk, tied with careful precision. The familiar scent of willow bark brought memories of her mother's remedies for headaches. That evening, when pain crept behind her eyes after a long day of teaching, she brewed the herbs into tea. The relief came swiftly, and she caught Nanton's slight nod of satisfaction as she sipped. Later that week, while sweeping the schoolhouse steps, she noticed a tear in Nanton's shirt as he chopped firewood. That night, by lamplight, she mended it with tiny, even stitches. When she handed it back, their fingers brushed briefly. His quiet thank you carried more weight than the simple words should bear. Sunday arrived bright and clear. The church. Bells tolled, drawing townsfolk from their homes. Lily's steps faltered as she approached the white-painted building, Nanton a steady presence beside her. The weight of stairs pressed against her back as they climbed the steps together. Inside, the familiar scent of beeswax and hymnal pages filled the air. Several pews turned away as they entered, faces set in stony disapproval. But in the back row, elderly Mrs. Henderson and Widow Blake offered small, encouraging smiles. Their weathered faces held understanding that brought unexpected tears to Prue. Lily's eyes. Reverend Matthews stood at the pulpit, his expression caught between duty and compassion. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded slightly, indicating a pew near the middle. It was more than Lily had dared hope for. The service passed in a blur of familiar hymns and scripture readings. Lily felt Nanton's solid presence beside her, respectful. Though he didn't join in the singing, his quiet dignity in the face of sideways glances made her stand straighter. Afterward, as people gathered outside the church, Farmer Johnson struggled with a heavy feed sack from his wagon. Without ceremony, Nanton stepped forward and lifted it easily onto the man's porch. Johnson's weathered face registered surprise, then grudging appreciation. "Much obliged," he muttered, touching his hat brim. It wasn't friendship, but it was something. That evening, the schoolhouse felt different. The air hung heavy with unspoken thoughts as Lily prepared their simple supper. The day's events had stirred something in her, a need to speak truth, even if it meant facing judgment. "I should tell you," she said quietly, setting down her fork, "about why that rancher's words hurt so deeply." Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her napkin. I can't bear children. The doctor said so years ago, after my husband died. It's why I never remarried." "What man would want?" Her voice caught on the familiar shame. Nanton's dark eyes held no mockery, only a depth of understanding that made her breath catch. "I had a wife," he said softly, "and a daughter. 3 winters ago, soldiers came. They did not ask questions first." The simple words carried oceans of grief. Lily's own pain seemed to shrink beside the magnitude of his loss. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "Some wounds do not heal," he continued, his voice low and steady, "but they teach us to see others' pain more clearly." The lamplight flickered between them, casting soft shadows on the walls. In that moment, Lily saw their strange arrangement differently. Perhaps it wasn't just an accident or an act of protection. Perhaps God's hand moved in ways she couldn't understand, bringing together 2 wounded souls who could recognize each other's pain. Nanton rose and added wood to the stove, his movements deliberate and calm. When he sat again, something had shifted between them, a fragile bridge built of shared grief and tentative trust. "Your children," Lily said carefully, "in the schoolhouse. They learn well from you." It wasn't much, but it was an offering, an acknowledgement of his gentle way with her students. He nodded once, understanding the gift in her words. They finished their meal in comfortable silence, the evening wrapping around them like a soft blanket. Later, as Nanton settled onto his porch bench and Lily prepared for bed, the night felt less lonely than before. Through the window, she could see his silhouette, steady as a mountain against the starlit sky. For the first time since this strange marriage began, she felt truly at peace with his presence. Sleep came easily that night, her dreams unburdened by the usual weight of solitude. A week passed swiftly, each day bringing fresh worries about the railroad's growing shadow over their community. The morning air carried tension as thick as summer storm clouds. Lily watched from her schoolhouse window as railroad men visited. Farm after farm, their leather document cases swinging like weapons at their sides. By midday, 3 more farmers had trudged into town, shoulders slumped in defeat. Each had signed away portions of their land, pressed by threats of being cut off from the creek's precious water. The sight made something fierce rise in Lily's chest. "We must do something," she declared that evening, setting down her spoon with unusual force. Nanton looked up from his bowl, his dark eyes questioning. "The railroad men think they can divide U.S., picking off farmers one by one. But what if we stood together, townfolk and Apache alike?" Nanton's expression grew serious. "Many wounds between our peoples. deep wounds. Not easy to heal. But not impossible, Lily insisted, her voice gaining strength. I've seen how the children play together now, sharing games at recess. They don't carry the old hurts. Perhaps we could learn from them. She stood and paced the small room, her skirt swishing against the rough floorboards. I believe faith can bridge these divisions. Not just my Christian faith, but faith in each other, in what we could build together. Nathan studied her for a long moment, his face unreadable in the lamplight. Finally, he nodded slowly. We will go tomorrow. You will speak to my people. Dawn found them loading Lily's small wagon, the wheels creaking under the weight of peace. Offerings, fresh-baked bread, dried apples, and carefully wrapped packages of coffee. Lily's hands trembled slightly as she gathered her shawl around her shoulders. The morning air held autumn's first bite. The journey to the Apache camp took most of the morning. As they drove, Nanton pointed out landmarks. A lightning struck oak that marked the boundary of grazing lands, a cluster of rocks where medicinal herbs grew. Lily listened intently, seeing the landscape through new eyes. When they arrived, the camp stirred with curious activity. Children peeked from behind their mothers' skirts, and warriors stood straight-backed, watching. Lily felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon her as Nanton helped her down from the wagon. She had practiced the traditional greeting he had taught her, speaking the words carefully. I come in peace, seeking wisdom. Her pronunciation wasn't perfect, but the effort brought approving murmurs from some of the older women. The elders, however, were less easily impressed. They sat in a semicircle, their faces stern as stone. One elder spoke sharply in Apache, gesturing at Lily with obvious disapproval. Nanton stepped forward, his voice carrying across the camp with quiet authority. She is my wife, he said in English, then continued in Apache, his words passionate though Lily couldn't understand them. She caught only her name, woven through his speech like a bright thread. Finally, he switched back to English, his hand resting lightly on Lily's shoulder. She carries no children, but she carries courage. She sees beyond the boundaries others build. She teaches all children as her own. The words touched something deep in Lily's heart, bringing unexpected tears to her eyes. The eldest of the council, a woman with silver braids and eyes like dark pools, studied her intently before nodding once. We will hear her words. As the sun began its descent, the camp gathered around the central fire. Lily sat beside Nanton, drawing strength from his presence as she shared her vision. She spoke of the creek that sustained them all, of the railroad's greed threatening both their peoples. Her voice grew stronger as she described her dream. Children from both communities learning side by side, sharing stories and songs, building bridges their parents thought impossible. I have seen it beginning already, she said, the firelight dancing across her face. In my schoolhouse, Apache children teach my students their games. Town children share their books. They laugh together, pray together, grow together. Could we not learn from their wisdom? The skepticism that had greeted her arrival slowly shifted. She saw it in the softening of stern faces, in the thoughtful nods of mothers holding their children close. The elder with silver braids asked questions about her teaching, about how she handled conflicts between the children. Each answer seemed to satisfy something in the old woman's assessment. As the evening deepened, women brought forward food, fresh bread and stewed rabbit, dried berries, and roasted corn. The sharing of meals, Lily knew, was its own kind of language. She accepted each offering with genuine gratitude, noting how the children crept closer, drawn by her smile. The ride home was quiet, stars pricking through the darkening sky above them. Lily's hand shook slightly as the day's tension finally released its hold. I was so afraid, she admitted softly. Afraid I would say the wrong thing, make everything worse. Nanton guided the horses around a bend in the trail. You spoke with the voice of a mother, he said simply. One who sees all children as precious, no matter their blood. They heard this truth in your words. Warmth bloomed in Lily's chest, different from anything she had felt before. For so long, she had seen her inability to bear children as a mark of shame, a failure of womanhood. But perhaps there were other ways to mother, other paths to nurturing. Life and hope. They drove on through the gathering dusk, the wagon's steady movement matching the rhythm of Lily's thoughts. Something had shifted today, like the first spring thaw breaking winter's hold. It wasn't victory yet, But it was a beginning. The next evening, lamplight spilled from the church windows onto the dusty street. Lily stood at the worn wooden doors, her heart beating quick as a bird's wing as she greeted each arrival. Farmers trudged in with dirt still fresh on their boots. Widows clutched their shawls close, whispering amongst themselves. Several ranch hands slouched against the back pews, their Sunday hats held respectfully in rough hands. The murmurs grew louder when hoofbeats announced new arrivals. Nanton led a small group of Apache riders into town, their horses' flanks gleaming in the fading light. The church fell silent as they entered, their moccasins silent on the wooden floor. Lily noticed how some townspeople shifted uneasily in their seats, yet none left. "Welcome," she said, her voice carrying in the hushed space. "Thank you all for coming tonight." Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the edge of the lectern, but her voice grew stronger with each word. "We gather here because something precious is being threatened, the water that gives life to all our homes." She described the railroad's tactics, how they pressed farmers one by one, how they ignored treaty rights and common decency alike. "But together," she continued, "we might stand against this injustice. Together, our voice could reach all the way to Denver." A heavy silence followed her words. Then Martha Weber, a widow who lived alone at the edge of town, stood slowly. "That creek waters my only cow," she said, her voice wavering but clear. "Without her milk, I couldn't stay on my land. It ain't right for any man to steal what God provided free." Her words seemed to break a dam. Others began to speak first hesitantly, then with growing passion. A young Apache brave named Standing Fox rose, speaking in careful English about how their camp depended on the same stream for crops and horses. A farmer described how his children played in those waters just as his grandfather had before him. Preacher, Reverend Mills, had been listening intently. He stood now, his lined face thoughtful. "This house of God has always been meant as shelter for all who seek justice," he declared. "Let it serve now as neutral ground where we might work together for the good of all." Lily brought out the petition. She had carefully prepared. In clear language, it detailed their grievances against the railroad company and demanded recognition of both legal and traditional water rights. She had written it twice, once in English and once in Apache, with Nanton's help translating. "Who will be first to sign?" she asked, holding up the pen. For a moment, no one moved. Then Martha Weber came forward, her arthritis-twisted fingers grasping the pen firmly. After her came Standing Fox, then Reverend Mills. One by one, others followed, farmers and Apache warriors, widows and ranch hands. Each signature represented a small act of courage. A choice to trust God. As the last person signed, Lily felt tears pricking at her eyes. She blinked them back, but Reverend Mills noticed. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," he said softly. "Sometimes he uses the most unexpected vessels to pour out his grace." The meeting dispersed slowly, people lingering to talk in small groups. Lily noticed something remarkable. Townsfolk and Apaches were speaking directly to each other, pointing at the petition, nodding in agreement. Children darted between adults' legs, playing together without regard for the boundaries their parents were just beginning to cross. As the last lantern was extinguished, Lily stepped out into the starlit night. The air held the crisp edge of autumn, carrying the scent of sage and prairie grass. Nanton waited by the church steps, his tall figure outlined against the sky. They walked together toward the schoolhouse, their footsteps falling into an easy rhythm. The night wrapped around them like a familiar blanket, and Lily felt the day's tension slowly easing from her shoulders. "Something is different now," she said softly, not looking directly at him. "Between us, I mean. I feel it growing, this trust. It's like," she searched for words, "like spring water rising from deep earth." Nanton was quiet for several steps. Then, with a gentleness that still surprised her, he reached for her hand. His palm covered hers briefly, warm and calloused. In that simple touch lay understanding, deeper than words could reach. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and constant, as they continued their walk home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, Lily held close the memory of signatures flowing across paper, of voices raised together, of a touch that spoke of trust slowly earned and freely given. The morning dew still clung to the grass. when Lily and Nanton loaded their petition into the wagon. They had wrapped it carefully in oilcloth to protect the precious signatures on their journey to the county office. As they rode together, the wagon wheels creaking beneath them, Lily noticed how naturally they had fallen into step with each other's rhythms. At the county office, the clerk's eyebrows rose at the sight of their unlikely partnership, but he stamped. The petition received and promised it would reach the proper authorities. That small victory felt like the first breath of spring after a long winter. The days that followed brought an unexpected peace to their lives. The schoolhouse became more than just a place of learning, it transformed into a home. Each morning, Lily would wake to find the stove already lit, tendrils of warmth pushing back the dawn chill. Nanton moved through their shared space with quiet dignity, his presence as steady as the mountains on the horizon. One afternoon, as Lily kneaded dough in the kitchen, the familiar scent of yeast rising in the air, she heard children's laughter floating through the open window. Nanton sat on the schoolhouse steps, his skilled hands moving steadily as he carved a small wooden horse. A group of children clustered around him, watching in fascination as shavings curled away from his knife. "Uncle Nanton," little Sarah Miller called out, "can you make it gallop like the last one?" The name fell from her lips naturally, without hesitation. Other children took up the cry, "Uncle Nanton, Uncle Nanton." Lily's hands stilled in the dough as warmth bloomed in her chest. Through the window, she watched Nanton demonstrate how the carved horse's legs could move, his usual stoic expression softening as the children clapped with delight. That evening, after the bread had cooled and the last child had wandered home, Lily found herself drawn to the creek. The water burbled over rocks that had been worn smooth by countless seasons, its song unchanged by the disputes of men. Nanton walked beside her, their footsteps matching in the gathering dusk. They reached a quiet bend where willows dipped their branches toward the water. Lily gathered her courage, her fingers twisting in her skirts. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," she said softly, "like I belong somewhere. Like I'm part of," she hesitated, the word catching in her throat. "Family." Nanton finished for her, his deep voice gentle as summer rain. "Yes," she whispered, "but how can that be?" "I'm not." Her hand pressed unconsciously against her empty womb, an old gesture of grief. Nanton turned to face her, his dark eyes holding wisdom earned through his own losses. "Family is not only born," he said, each word carefully chosen. "It is chosen, built, like this creek builds its path through stone, patient, steady, sure." A cricket chirped nearby, its song mixing with the water's melody. Lily felt tears gathering in her eyes, but these were different from the bitter ones she had shed in lonely nights past. These felt like relief, like acceptance. Nanton's hand found hers, strong fingers entwining with her own. The touch felt as natural as breathing. When he turned toward her, she didn't pull away. Their first kiss was gentle as morning mist, tender as new leaves unfurling. The creek sang beside them, and overhead, the first stars began to appear. Lily's heart felt too full for words. All the barriers she had built around herself since her husband's death seemed to melt away like spring snow. Here, in this moment, she found something she had thought forever lost, the promise of tomorrow, the warmth of belonging. They stood together by the creek until twilight deepened into true night, their joined hands a bridge between two worlds. Neither noticed the distant figure on the hill, where the railroad agent crouched in the shadows, his face twisted with calculated malice as he watched their tender moment. The creek continued its ancient song, heedless of the storm gathering on the horizon. For now, there was only this, the sound of water over stone, the warmth of joined hands, and the quiet miracle of hearts finding their way home to each other. The peaceful morning shattered like glass when Deputy Frank Toller thundered into town on his lathered horse. His face was twisted with barely contained glee as he yanked his mount to a stop in front of the mercantile, stirring up clouds of dust. People gathered quickly, drawn by the commotion. "Where's that Apache?" Toller bellowed, his voice carrying. "Down the street. Got a warrant here, says he assaulted one of the railroad's men." Lily had been writing tomorrow's lessons on the blackboard when she heard the shouts. Her chalk snapped in her grip as she rushed to the schoolhouse door. Through the morning haze, she saw Nanton emerging from behind the building where he'd been chopping wood. His face remained calm, but his shoulders tensed at the deputy's approach. "That's a lie." Old widow Sarah Peterson called out from her porch. "The Apache ain't done nothing wrong." Other voices joined hers, townspeople who had grown to know Nanton over the past weeks. Deputy Toller ignored them all, swinging down from his saddle with chains rattling at his belt. "Got 3 witnesses say different," he sneered, pulling out papers with an official seal. "Say you threatened to scalp the foreman when he was just doing his job." "No." Lily's voice cracked as she ran forward. "Nanton has been here every day, teaching the children about the land, helping with repairs. He wouldn't—" "Stand back, Mrs. Whitfield." Toller cut her off, already moving toward Nanton with the chains. "This ain't your concern no more." Nanton stood perfectly still as Toller approached, his eyes finding Lily's across the dusty street. She saw in them a deep sadness, but also determination. He would not fight, would not give them excuse for violence. The chains closed around his wrists with a cruel click. "Please," Lily begged, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Someone stop this." But the townsfolk who had signed their petition now looked away, shuttering their windows against the scene. Fear had stolen their newfound courage. Toller yanked the chains, forcing Nanton to stumble forward. "Time to show everyone what happens when Indians forget their place," he announced loudly. Dragging his prisoner down the main street, the preacher pushed through the crowd, his Bible clutched to his chest. "Now see here, deputy," he began, reaching for Toller's arm. This man has shown nothing, but Toller's elbow shot out, catching the preacher in the chest and sending him sprawling into the dust. "Keep your sermons in church, old man," he spat. Lily ran alongside them, her skirts gathering dust, tears streaming down her face. "This is wrong. He's innocent." Her voice grew hoarse from shouting. A few townspeople nodded, muttering agreement. But none dared step forward. At the jail, Sheriff Kettle stood in the doorway, his weathered face impassive as stone. Lily rushed up to him, grabbing his sleeve. "Sheriff, please. You know Nanton. You've seen how he is with the children, how he's helped unite the town, Mrs. Whitfield," the sheriff said coldly, not meeting her eyes. "You'd best remember that Apaches have no legal standing here. This is white man's territory." He stepped aside to let Toller drag Nanton into the jail. Just before the door closed, Nanton turned his head slightly. His voice carried soft but clear. "Keep teaching the children, little dove. They are our hope." The sound of the cell door clanging shut echoed through Lily's bones like a death knell. She stood there until the sun began to set, watching shadows creep across the jail's weather-worn boards. Finally, her legs trembling, she made her way back to the schoolhouse. The empty rooms felt like a tomb. Everything reminded her of Nanton: the neat stack of firewood by the stove, the half-finished wooden horse on the workbench, his blanket folded carefully on the porch bench. Their fragile dream of unity lay in ruins, scattered like leaves in an autumn wind. Night fell, bringing no comfort with its stars. Lily knelt beside her narrow bed, her hands clasped so tight her knuckles showed white. "Please, Lord," she whispered into the darkness, her voice breaking. "Don't let this be the end. Show me how to help him. Show me your purpose in this trial." Her prayers continued long into the night, mixing with her tears until she could no longer tell which was which. Outside, a coyote called mournfully across the empty prairie, its cry echoing the ache in her heart. The creek still flowed past. The town, its waters singing the same song they had when she and Nanton had shared their first kiss. But now its music seemed to carry only sorrow. In her mind, she kept seeing Nanton's face as they chained him, not angry, not defeated, but filled with a quiet strength that made her own weakness feel like a sin. He had chosen peace even in the face of injustice, while she had only been able to cry out helplessly. "Grant me strength," she prayed, pressing her forehead against the rough wooden floorboards. "Grant me wisdom. Grant me faith enough to believe that love and truth will prevail." But the night gave no answer, and her world remained shattered into pieces she could not see how to mend. Dawn crept over the horizon like a timid creature, bringing no warmth to chase away the autumn chill. Lily had not slept, her red-rimmed eyes testament to a night spent in prayer and tears. The schoolhouse felt hollow without Nanton's steady presence. She forced herself to rise from her knees, smoothing her wrinkled skirts with trembling hands. "Weeping may endure for a night," she whispered, remembering her father's favorite psalm. "But joy comes in the morning." Even if she couldn't quite believe it yet, the empty classroom mocked her with its silence. No cheerful fire crackled in the stove. Nanton had always had it burning before she woke. Shivering, Lily wrapped her shawl tighter and moved to her desk. There must be something she could do besides cry. Her gaze fell on the ancient filing cabinet. In the corner, its drawers stuffed with yellowed papers from previous teachers. She had never bothered to sort through them before, but now she pulled open the top drawer, sending dust motes dancing in the weak morning light. Hours passed as Lily dug through decades of records. Her fingers grew grimy, but she barely noticed, too intent on her search. Finally, buried beneath attendance logs from 15 years ago, she found what she hadn't known. She was looking for water rights documentation for the creek. "Dear Lord," she breathed, spreading the papers across her desk. The original deed showed the creek as common land, meant to serve both town and tribal territories. But newer documents, dated just months ago, told a different story. Names were wrong, dates didn't align, and signatures looked suspiciously similar. Lily's hand shook as she carefully copied every detail, her teacher's penmanship serving her well. When she finished, she tucked the copies into her Bible for safekeeping. The morning was nearly gone. She barely took time to wash her face and pin her hair neatly before heading to the jail. The street seemed unusually quiet, though she felt eyes watching from behind curtained windows. Outside the jail, Deputy Toller slouched in a chair, picking his teeth with a knife. "Come to see your savage husband?" He sneered as she approached. "Careful now, he's feeling mighty ornery today." Lily lifted her chin, refusing to let him see how his words stung. "I wish to speak with my husband," she said firmly. "It is my right." Toller made a show of considering, then shrugged and unlocked the door. 10 minutes, he growled. "That's all." The cell was dark and damp. Nanton sat on a narrow cot, his broad shoulders hunched against the cold. When he looked up, Lily had to bite back a cry. His left eye was swollen. Purple bruising spread across his cheekbone. "Who did this to you?" she whispered, reaching through the bars to touch his face. Nanton caught her hand gently. "It does not matter," he said, his voice steady despite his injuries. "What matters is that you are here." "I found something," Lily told him urgently, pressing close to the bars. "Documents about the creek rights. The railroad's claims, they're false. There are inconsistencies, signs of fraud. If I can prove it—" "Do not fight alone," Nanton interrupted, his good eye intense as he studied her face. "They will crush." "One voice, but many voices together," he squeezed her hand. "Remember the petition. Remember what we built." Lily gripped his fingers fiercely. "I won't abandon you," she promised. "Whatever it takes, I'll find a way to prove your innocence." "Time's up." Toller's voice cracked like a whip. Lily reluctantly released Nanton's hand, but his warmth lingered on her skin as she left the jail. The day grew colder as clouds gathered overhead. Walking back through town, Lily couldn't help but hear the whispers that followed her. Somewhere. Sympathetic, poor thing, she's been through so much, while others cut deeper. Married to a savage, someone muttered. And her barren besides. What kind of life is that? It ain't even a real marriage, another voice added. More like keeping a wild dog for protection. Lily's steps faltered, but before despair could take hold, she heard a familiar voice call out, "Mrs. Whitfield." "A moment, please." Widow Sarah Peterson hurried over, followed by 3 other elderly women from the church. Their faces were kind, their eyes determined. "We've been talking," Sarah said, taking Lily's cold hands in her warm ones. "About what happened yesterday. It ain't right, what they're doing to Nanton. We're ready to stand with you, whatever you need." Tears pricked Lily's eyes, but she blinked them back. "Thank you," she whispered. "I may need your help sooner than you think." That evening, Lily sat at her desk, lamp burning low as she arranged her evidence. The copied documents lay before her, along with notes about witnesses who might speak to Nanton's character. Her hands trembled slightly as she worked, but her writing remained steady. Fear still churned in her stomach, fear of failure, fear of ridicule, fear of losing what little respect she had left in the town. But underneath the fear ran a deeper current of resolve, strong as the creek itself. She thought of Nanton in his cell, bearing his injuries with dignity. She thought of the children who had grown to love their Uncle Nanton. She thought of the brief, precious peace they had built between 2 peoples. "I will not let them destroy this," she murmured, carefully organizing her papers. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the schoolhouse windows. But Lily barely noticed, too focused on her task. The lamp burned steadily beside her, casting her shadow large against the wall as she worked into the night. Sunday morning dawned bright and crisp, the kind of autumn day that usually lifted spirits. But as Lily stood before her mirror, pinning her hair with trembling fingers, her stomach churned with anxiety. The documents lay safely in her Bible, each page marked carefully with ribbon. The church bell rang across the quiet town, its familiar tone somehow more solemn today. Lily clutched her Bible close and stepped out into the morning air. A few early risers nodded to her as she passed, their expressions a mix of pity and curiosity. The wooden steps of the church creaked under her feet as she climbed them, pausing only briefly to straighten her shoulders before entering. Inside, the usual peaceful atmosphere was replaced by an undercurrent of tension. Whispers died away as she walked down the aisle, choosing a pew near the front. She could feel Deputy Toller's sneer from where he sat with the railroad men, but she kept her eyes forward, focused on the cross above the altar. The church filled. Quickly, farmers and shopkeepers, wives and children, it seemed the whole town had turned out. Even those who rarely attended had come, drawn by the promise of drama. The wooden pews groaned under the weight of so many bodies, and the air grew thick with the scent of Sunday clothes and nervous anticipation. Preacher Matthews began the service as always, his voice steady as he led them through familiar hymns. Lily sang mechanically, her mind on the papers in her Bible and the empty space beside her where Nanton should have been. The sermon passed in a blur of words about truth and justice. Verses that seemed chosen specially for this morning. As the final prayer ended, Lily's heart hammered against her ribs. Now was the moment. Before the congregation could rise to leave, she stood, her legs shaking beneath her skirts. "Preacher Matthews," she called out, her voice clearer than she'd expected. "I beg your pardon, but I must speak." The preacher paused, surprise crossing his weathered face. Then he nodded slowly. "Speak then, Mrs. Whitfield." Lily moved to the front of the church, turning to face the congregation. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching dust motes in its beams. She opened her Bible and removed the documents with hands that only slightly trembled. "These papers," she began, holding them up, "were found in the school records. They tell a story that every person here needs to hear." She took a deep breath and began reading, her teacher's voice carrying to every corner of the church. As she read through the original deeds, showing the creek as common land, murmurs of recognition spread through the crowd. But when she reached the newer documents, pointing out the mismatched dates and forged signatures, those murmurs turned to gasps of shock. "Look here," she said, turning one page toward the light. "This signature claims to be from John Miller, dated June 15th of this year." She paused, letting her eyes find Sarah Peterson in the crowd. "But John Miller died last winter, didn't he, Mrs. Peterson?" "That he did," Sarah called out firmly. "In January, God rest his soul." Deputy Toller surged to his feet. "Now see here, and here," Lily continued, her voice rising over his, "is a signature supposedly from Chief Running. Wolf, but the name is spelled wrong, and the mark," she held up the paper. "It's nothing like his true mark, which many of us have seen on the petition." "That's enough," Toller shouted, his face red with anger. He started forward, but several farmers stood up, blocking his path. "Let her speak," one called out. "We want to hear the truth," another added. Lily's voice grew stronger. "The railroad has stolen from both settlers and Apaches alike. They've imprisoned an innocent man, my husband, to silence those who would stand against them. But we know the truth now." "That Apache of yours is no innocent," Toller sneered. "He's a savage who—" "That Apache," Sarah Peterson's voice rang, out clear and strong, "is a better Christian than most men here." She stood, her thin frame straight with dignity. "I've watched him help widows carry water, fix children's toys, and bear false imprisonment without a word of hatred." "Can you say the same, Deputy Toller?" A wave of agreement swept through the church. More people stood, farmers who had seen Nanton's quiet strength, mothers whose children spoke of his kindness, men who had witnessed his integrity. Preacher Matthews raised his hands for quiet. When the congregation settled, he turned to Lily. his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said solemnly, "you have shown great courage today. The Lord tells us that the truth shall set us free." He faced the congregation. "Let us pray for that truth to prevail and for justice to be done." Deputy Toller didn't wait for the prayer. He stormed out, the church door slamming behind him. But Lily hardly noticed. Surrounded now by townspeople offering support and sharing their own stories of the railroad's deceptions. As the sun began to set that evening, people gathered at the schoolhouse, bringing lanterns and determination. Farmers stood shoulder to shoulder with shopkeepers, while their wives shared bread and coffee. The widows sat in a row of chairs like a jury, Sarah Peterson at their center, discussing strategy in fierce whispers. "We'll go to the sheriff together," declared Mr. Anderson, the blacksmith, "first thing tomorrow. He can't ignore all of us." "And if he tries," added Sarah Peterson, her eyes glinting, "we'll go over his head to the territory judge. I've got a cousin who rides circuit. He'll hear us out." Lily moved through the crowd, accepting handshakes and words of support, her heart full almost to bursting. The schoolhouse that had once felt so lonely now hummed with the energy of shared purpose. Through the window, she could see more lanterns approaching townsfolk still coming to join their cause. "Mrs. Whitfield," the preacher said quietly, touching her arm, "you've done a mighty thing today. Your husband would be proud." Lily blinked back tears, thinking of Nanton in his cell. "Tomorrow," she whispered. "Tomorrow we'll make things right." The meeting continued as darkness fell, plans being made, statements written down, unity growing stronger with each passing hour. The schoolhouse glowed with lamplight, a beacon of hope in the gathering night. Dawn painted the sky in gentle strokes of pink and gold as people began gathering in the town square. The morning air held the crisp bite of autumn, but the growing crowd generated its own warmth. Farmers in their work clothes stood beside women in simple cotton dresses, their faces set with determination. From the east, a group of Apache riders approached, their horses' hooves raising small clouds of dust. Lily stood on the church steps, watching the scene unfold. Her heart quickened as she saw Sarah Peterson leading a group of widows, each carrying baskets covered with cloth. Behind them came Mr. Anderson, the blacksmith, his massive arms crossed over his chest as he spoke quietly with other merchants. "It's time," Preacher Matthews said softly, touching Lily's elbow. She nodded, clutching the folder of documents against her chest. The crowd moved as one toward the jail, their footsteps creating a steady rhythm on the packed earth. Children darted between adults, excitement making them bold. As they approached, Sheriff Kettle emerged onto the wooden porch, his hand resting uneasily on his gun belt. "Now, folks," he began, but his voice wavered at the sight of so many determined faces. Mr. Anderson stepped forward. "Sheriff, we've come for justice. Those railroad papers were forged, and you know it. You've got an innocent man in there," Sarah Peterson added, her voice carrying clearly. "And we ain't leaving without him." The sheriff's eyes darted between faces, farmers he'd known for years, women who'd fed him at church suppers, Apache warriors who sat tall and proud on their horses. The deputy Toller pushed through the jail door, his face twisted with anger. "This is unlawful assembly," he shouted. "Clear out, or what?" It was young Tommy Baker who spoke up, the banker's son. "You'll arrest us all? Better build a bigger jail." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Lily stepped forward, opening her folder. "Sheriff Kettle, these documents prove the railroad's fraud. Will you uphold the law, or shall we ride to the territory judge today?" The sheriff's shoulders sagged as the fight went out of him. He turned to Deputy Toller. "Give me the keys." "You can't," Toller began, but the sheriff cut him off. "I said give me the keys, deputy, now." The crowd held its breath as Toller's face reddened. Then someone called out, "How much did the railroad pay you, Toller?" More voices joined in. "We saw you meeting with their agent. Taking bribes ain't Christian. Shame on you." Toller backed away from the jeers, his hand dropping to his gun. But before he could draw, Mr. Anderson stepped forward, towering over him. "I wouldn't," the blacksmith said quietly. The deputy's nerve broke. He threw the keys at the sheriff's feet and ran, pushing through the crowd as people shouted after him. Nobody moved to stop him. His shame was punishment enough. Sheriff Kettle picked up the keys with trembling hands and walked to the cell. The sound of the lock turning echoed. In the sudden quiet, Nantum emerged slowly into the sunlight, his face bruised but his dignity intact. For a moment, he stood still, taking in the sight of his people and the townsfolk standing together. Lily couldn't help herself. She ran forward, clasping his rough hands in hers. "Welcome home," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Cheer went up from the crowd, starting soft and building until it echoed off the buildings. Apache riders raised their hands in celebration, and children danced in circles, caught up in the joy of the moment. As the sun climbed higher, the celebration moved to the open space beside the church. Women unpacked baskets of cornbread and pies, while Apache hunters brought fresh venison for the stew pot. Mr. Anderson and 2 Apache men worked together to build a cooking fire, trading stories as they stacked wood. The autumn air filled with the scent of cooking food and the sound of many languages. Children played tag between the adults, their laughter a sweet counterpoint to the deeper sounds of conversation. Lily watched as Sarah Peterson learned to pat cornbread the Apache way, while young Tommy Baker sat fascinated as an elderly brave showed him how to read weather signs. Near sunset, as people gathered in groups to eat, Lily found a quiet moment with Nanton. They sat together on a fallen log, their bowls of venison stew warming their hands. The golden light caught the silver in his black hair, and despite his bruises, his eyes were peaceful. "You gave me back my people," he said quietly, gesturing to where Apache families sat mixed with townsfolk, sharing food and stories. Lily looked at the scene before them, at the ways love and courage had transformed fear into friendship. "And you," she replied, her voice soft but sure, "you gave me back my dignity." Their eyes met, and they shared a smile filled with promise. Around them, the celebration continued as the sun painted the sky in brilliant colors. Children's laughter rang out, moths danced in the early evening light, and the air was rich with the scent of sage and wood smoke. Lily felt the warmth of belonging wash over her. Here, in this moment, she was part of something larger than herself, a community being born, a family chosen rather than given. She watched as an Apache grandmother taught a settler's child to weave a small basket, as farmers and braves compared notes on reading weather signs, as women from both peoples shared recipes and medicine lore. Exhausted but glowing with joy, she leaned slightly against Nanton's shoulder. The simple touch held more meaning than any words could express. Together, they watched their 2 peoples become one family, bound by something stronger than blood, the courage to choose love over fear, unity over division, and hope over hatred. The railroad's retreat left ripples of unease, like stones thrown in still water. Though the agent and his men had packed their survey equipment and slunk away, whispers still floated through town about what might come next. Some folks worried the company would return with more men, more guns, more tricks to divide them. But on this clear afternoon, with autumn sunshine warming the land, those fears seemed distant. Lily sat side saddle on her mare, watching Nanton guide his horse along the creek trail. The steady clip-clop of hooves mingled with birdsong and the distant sound of children's laughter as they rounded the bend. The creek opened before them. Willows dipped their branches in the clear water, and late wildflowers dotted the banks with purple and gold. Near the shallow ford, children splashed and Playtown kids in their cotton clothes alongside Apache youngsters in decorated leather. Their voices rose sweet and clear in the afternoon air. "Look, Miss Whitfield," Tommy Baker called out, proudly holding up a string of fish. Beside him, an Apache boy named Swift Deer showed him how to clean them with quick practiced movements. "Well done," Lily called back, her heart warming at their easy friendship. How natural it seemed now, these children playing together, when just weeks ago fear had kept them apart. Nanton dismounted first, then helped Lily down from her horse. They settled on a sun-warmed boulder near the water's edge. For a while they simply watched the children play, their shoulders touching lightly. "The railroad may come back," Lily said softly, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at her. "With more men, more money to tempt folks," Nanton nodded slowly. "Yes, but now we are stronger together than apart." His deep voice held certainty. "My people remember how division weakens, how unity gives strength." Lily twisted her hands in her lap, another worry rising to the surface. "There will always be those who hate what we've built here, who say it's wrong for us to," she trailed off, unable to finish. To be married? Nanton finished gently. When she nodded, he continued, let them talk. Words cannot break what Creator has joined. His quiet confidence touched something deep in Lily's heart. She watched a group of girls, both Apache and town. Children weaving flower crowns together, their heads bent close as they worked. The sight filled her with longing so intense it brought tears to her eyes. I want this to be real, she whispered, her voice catching. A true marriage, not just protection. But the old shame rose up, bitter as medicine. I can't give you children, Nanton. You deserve a whole woman, one who can stop. His voice was gentle but firm. He took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. With his other hand, he gestured to the children playing along the creek banks. Look there. What do you see? Lily blinked away tears. Children playing. Our children, he corrected softly, all of them. They are ours to guide, to teach, to protect. The Creator gives different gifts. Yours is to mother with your heart, not your body. A small girl with dark braids ran up to them then, holding out a flower crown. For you, teacher, she said shyly, placing it on Lily's head. Before running back to her friends, she threw her arms around both Lily and Nanton in a quick hug. Lily touched the flowers in her hair, watching the child return to her play. Nanton's words echoed in her heart, beginning to ease the ache she had carried so long. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps family could grow from love as well as blood. As evening approached, they rode back to the schoolhouse. Lanterns already glowed in the windows, and the sound of voices carried on the cooling air. Inside, people gathered for the weekly hymn-singing idea born from Lily's desire to bring the communities closer. Widow Peterson sat at the small piano, her fingers moving confidently over the keys. Apache elders settled onto benches beside farmers' wives, while children sprawled on quilts near the front. Nanton helped Lily light the last of the lanterns, their golden light filling the room with warmth. Shall we begin with Amazing Grace? Lily suggested, knowing it was now familiar to both peoples. The piano notes rang out and voices rose together, some in English, some in Apache, all lifting in harmony toward the darkening sky. Lily stood near the back, letting the music wash over her. She watched as Mrs. Anderson helped an elderly Apache woman find the right page in the hymnal, as children leaned against their parents' legs, as faces glowed with shared joy in the lamplight. Nanton's arm slipped around her waist, strong and sure. In that moment, surrounded by the people they had helped bring together, Lily felt love fill her heart like lamplight filling a dark room. This was marriage, not just between two people, but between communities, between ways of life. This was family, chosen and cherished. The hymn ended and another began. Lily leaned into Nanton's embrace, adding her voice to the others. Outside, stars began to appear in the purple dusk, while inside, lantern light and song wrapped around them all like a warm blanket, binding them together in harmony and hope. Morning light danced on the creek's surface, turning each ripple into liquid gold. The water flowed clear and strong, carrying autumn leaves in its gentle current. Children's voices echoed across the banks, mixing with birdsong and the rustle of cottonwood trees. Lily stood near the water's edge, watching Tommy Baker teach little deer to skip stones while Sarah Peterson's twins splashed barefoot in the shallows with 3 Apache children. The sight still amazed her how naturally they played together, how easily they shared their games and laughter. Miss Whitfield, Emma called out, her dark braids swinging as she ran up with a handful of late wildflowers. These are for you. The little Apache girl's eyes shone with pure affection. Thank you, sweetheart, Lily replied, accepting the bouquet with a warm smile. She watched Emma skip back to her friends, remembering how just months ago, such a moment would have been unthinkable. The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention. Nanton approached on his paint horse, leading her mare behind him. He dismounted with fluid grace, and Lily noticed he carried something familiar, the thick woven blanket he had wrapped around her that night outside the mercantile when everything changed. Their small gathering of townsfolk and Apache families drew closer, sensing something important was about to happen. The children stopped their play, watching with curious eyes. Lily saw Sarah Peterson squeeze her husband's hand, while 2 ravens, one of the Apache elders, nodded slowly in approval. Nanton stepped forward, the blanket draped across his arms. The morning sun caught the silver in his hair, and his eyes held a warmth that made Lily's heart flutter. He moved with deliberate ceremony, each step measured and meaningful. "Months ago," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the hushed crowd, "I gave you this blanket in haste to protect your honor." He paused, meeting her gaze. "Today, I give it again, with my whole heart." Lily trembled as he lifted the blanket, just as he had that first night. But this time, when he wrapped it around her shoulders, his touch was tender, lingering. The familiar weight settled over her like an embrace. "I can't give you children," she whispered, her voice catching on the old pain, the words she had spoken so many times before. Nanton's smile was gentle as sunrise. "You already have." He gestured to the children gathered around them, settler and Apache alike, their faces bright with trust and affection. "They are all ours to love, to teach, to guide. This is the family the Great Spirit has given us." Tears blurred Lily's vision as understanding washed over her. She looked at the children, at Emma's sweet smile, at Tommy's proud stance as he showed the younger ones how to skip stones, at Little Dear's careful attention to his lessons. Each one had claimed a piece of her heart, just as surely as if she had borne them herself. The gathered families moved closer, forming a circle around them. Sarah Peterson stepped forward first, pressing a loaf of fresh bread into Lily's hands. 2 ravens followed with a gift of beaded medicine pouches. One by one, they offered small tokens, physical symbols of the bridges being built between their peoples. As the sun climbed higher, children returned to their play, splashing and laughing in the creek. The adults mingled cautiously but with growing ease, sharing stories and small talk. Lily saw Mrs. Thompson, who had once crossed the street to avoid Nanton, accepting a cup of coffee from an Apache grandmother. Lily and Nanton stood hand in hand, watching it all. His palm was warm against hers, calloused from work but gentle in its touch. "The path ahead won't be easy," she murmured. "No," he agreed. "But faith lights the way, like your lamplight in darkness." As twilight approached, they walked back to the schoolhouse together, their footsteps falling naturally in rhythm. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, while the first stars began to appear overhead. Behind them, the sounds of children's laughter and conversation faded slowly into evening peace. The schoolhouse windows glowed warmly, lanterns already lit inside. They paused in the doorway, taking in the familiar sight of desks and books, the small pump organ in the corner, the maps on the walls. This place had become more than just a school, it was the heart of their growing community. Without words, they knelt side by side near the organ. Lily's hand found Nanton's again as they bowed their heads in prayer. She gave thanks for redemption found in unexpected places, for dignity restored through love, for the family they had found in each other and in all the children who filled their days with purpose. From the church down the street, faint hymn voices drifted on the evening air. The familiar melody of Amazing Grace mingled with the soft sounds of Apache prayer songs. The two traditions wove together, creating something new and beautiful, a harmony of hope, a promise of what could be. Lily looked at Nanton, at the man who had first offered protection and now gave her his heart, and saw their future in his eyes. Together, they would build something stronger than the barriers that had once divided them. Together, they would teach their children, all their children, to live in peace. If something in this story whispered to your spirit, stay a while. Subscribe and come back tomorrow. The next story may be the one you didn't know you needed.